Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. I hope you enjoy.
Great. Well, welcome back, John.
It's good to be here still.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you some questions about interviewing when you've been on the other side of the table, right? Rather than as the interviewer, as the interviewee. So I'm always curious. I ask folks, how do you think you've done at interviews in the past? Do you feel like you smashed them? Do you feel like you're terrible at them? Somewhere in between, right?
I believe knowledge works only when we're fully transparent. So this will be a very confessional answer. I feel like I suck at being an interviewee. I'm always so nervous. I'm always double, triple, quadruple, quintuple thinking through, when they said and then took a sip from their cup, they hated my response. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is we put so much pressure on ourselves to be liked.
Yeah.
Right. That somehow, whether or not how the interview goes is a direct reflection on our own self-worth. So I would say this: whenever, sorry, I'm sitting here going, okay, how do you not give a 5-part answer to this simple question? Because that's the way my brain works. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. You have to get into a rhythm of getting out of your own head. I think that first interview, when I'm on the market looking for something, I almost always try to make sure it's a job that if I get it, great. If I don't, okay. And maybe that's really a bad way to think of it. More on the side of, if I don't get it, I'll be okay with not getting it.
Yeah.
Right. Because you never want to apply for something that it's like, oh shit, I got the job as the elephant behind Walker with the shovel. What do I do now? You're right. We don't want to set ourselves up for that. But I always try to find, kind of ease my way into it, because the first 1 or 2 interviews I do are god awful. They're just, I'm nervous. I'm overthinking. I'm anxious. I'm just not there to be myself. I'm putting on this fake performance. I've made reference to books and movies earlier. Men in Black. It was Edgar, but it was an alien wearing an Edgar suit, right? Sometimes in that interview process, I feel like I'm John, but not really John, because I'm wearing a John suit.
Yeah.
So I would say first 1 or 2 deplorably bad when I'm getting, and so it's okay. And then I kind of find my rhythm, and I think it's easier when I can remember all of the good things that I've done in my career,
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves, especially if it's been a long dry spell, I've done some amazing things. My amazing things might be different than anybody else's. I got to be part of a team that figured out how to send texts to Japanese handsets in Japan, right? And it was really, really cool, with 100% guaranteed delivery, right? And the solution ended up being really, really simple, but where we were at, we had just the right experience and perspective to put all the pieces together. Sorry, I've turned this into somehow how awesome I am. Let me stop doing that. It's okay to suck at interviews. It really genuinely is. It's okay to be nervous at interviews. I go through that. The trick is finding ways to get yourself excited and to remind yourself who you are and how to be you in the interview.
Yeah.
And when I get there, whether I get the gig or not, I knock it out of the park.
Sure.
Because I'm there, I'm fully present, I'm confident in what I can and can't do, and I've given them a fair decision. And if they say, sorry, John, we're going to pass. Okay.
Yeah.
Offline, we talked about the fact that I have a passion for community theater. And community theater has really helped with that sense of, they're not rejecting you as an artist or as an actor or as a performer, because your resume your artist resume says that you can do Hello Dolly. You can do that monologue in received pronunciation English, right? Which most people might see as a British accent. What they're telling you is you're not the right person for this role right now.
Yeah.
And if we can get that kind of mindset, and even if thickness of ego, is that the right thing? But thick skin,
Yeah. There you go.
where when you get rejected for an interview, just remind yourself you've done amazing things, because it's what I have to do. I'm being very confessional here. I have to remind myself I've done good things. I have to remind myself that people like working with me, and I have to remind myself that all they're saying is that I'm not the right person for this role right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so easy to let that self-doubt creep in no matter what. And I think some people might see your background. Oh, you worked at Amazon, you worked at all these brand name companies. Like, how do you feel that way? Obviously you're great at what you do, right? So I think it's so funny that that even at a level where people are like, oh, shouldn't you just be confident now, right? Like, it's so difficult to just like mentally fortify yourself of like, I've got this, I know I can do this job, and be able to be effortless in an interview. It's just it's not easy to click on and off, right? And
No, it's
like you
not.
said, you got to go through a couple of, okay, I know this isn't going to be my best interview, but I got to go through it, right? And then you got to do another one. You go, okay, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable, and I can be myself a little bit more. Okay, now you start to gel a little bit, right? And I think that's the
Right.
hard part of like not getting the emotions wrapped up in it, and then I'm getting like a spiral of like, I don't even want to do this because I know how or like dreading how bad it's going to be, right?
No, and I wish I'd said that. Because it's so flipping true. That I know for a fact the mindset that I carry into the interview will dictate the outcome. If I go in just burdened with self-doubt, insecurity, too many voices in my head, in terms of, well, last time you were asked that question, you sucked at your answer, and you know what I mean? That self-critical tape.
Yeah.
If I go into the interview carrying those things with me, I'm not going to get the job.
Yeah.
End of story. I am not going to get the job. But I do know that if I walk in there with, Guy Smiley, I think his name was, from the old Saturday Night Live, I'm a really nice person, and gosh darn it, people really like me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if I can walk in with that kind of self-talk and confidence, they're going to react to that.
Yeah.
And almost always react positively.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a really interesting, I think it was a Brad Pitt quote where he was talking about how he has self-doubt and thinks, has days where he thinks he's a terrible actor and yada yada yada, right? Brad, and this was, I think when it came out, it was the most famous, whatever,
yeah.
the pinnacle of successful Hollywood actor, right? And someone said, if that guy has self-doubt and has a little thing in the back of his head saying, you're not good enough, you're not doing this right, like, why are we even listening to that voice? Right? Like, the voice is wrong, right? Like, it's very clear
I
that the
know,
voice is
right?
wrong, right?
Well,
But it's so hard to embrace that okay, I gotta ignore that voice and believe that I can actually do this, right? But it's true, and that's a mindset that's difficult to get in. And like you said, there's almost some element of like, I gotta put the face on first. And sometimes for me, it's literally the first couple minutes of the interview, I'm almost faking it. Like, I have to put out more energy and more excitement than I normally would in this moment, because I'm just compensating for being 20% lower than I normally would be, because I'm sad and depressed and scared about this interview, right? So I think it's so hard to find that balance.
It's very difficult. And that's why I say, look, go in and be yourself. Be yourself.
Yeah.
You look, you've graduated, you've got the job experience, you've got the resume, you've got the measures of success. What you're looking for is, you're looking for your home. And sometimes getting adopted is hard.
Yeah.
Right? It shouldn't be, but sometimes it is. And we live in a culture that really kind of prides itself on measuring success, right? Like, you made the quote about Brad Pitt. I just saw him in 2 movies back to back, and now I'm going to draw a complete blank on one of them. It's a romantic comedy, Sandra Bullock, and he plays like this. It's just a bit character, right? But he plays this like really zen, very centered superhero guy, right? And then he disappears from the movie, right? But but the way he does it, he is so saturatedly present in that character that I'm like, yeah. And then I just saw Bullet Train, where he plays a very different variation of that character, and it's like, yeah. Could we ignore Troy? Right? It was Troy, right? I think that was the name of the movie, right? If we just ignore that film, you're a pretty good actor. And I think the flip side, and we could spend a whole another podcast on this. The biggest trick in interviewing as an interviewee is to go in well coached. And well coached in our society is like, see how successful and amazing I am. And there is an element of that, right? But well coached also means you know how to be relaxed. You know how to be present. You know how to be appropriately confident and humble in the same mix, with all of that being genuinely who you are when you show up for work, right? The worst thing you can do in an interview is wear a mask, right? And I said earlier that interviews are somewhat adversarial, right? The person sitting as an interviewee, what are your questions? What are you looking for? What's your litmus test for whether or not it's a good culture fit? I mean, I've even flown out on my own dime to move to a company, to potentially relocate for a company. And I just said, can I have a hall pass? I just want to walk around. And they said, sure. And they gave me a hall pass, and they gave me access to like 4 buildings. And I just walked around, and I didn't smell any cancer, right? It was a non-toxic place to work. I went out there and I had some of the best 7 years of my career. I got to solve interesting problems, work with amazing people. We're getting way off topic. Sorry, I tend to do that. But I think I would almost say this to my younger self. You know that you're ready for the interview when you know what questions, when you've done enough research on the company and the opportunity, that you know what questions you want to ask too, right? Because then I know that I've got skin in the game. I've got control, right? And maybe it's just a mind trick, but I think it's a real one. And so today, when I'm interviewing, I have 1 or 2 questions. And if you ask me what they are, I couldn't tell you, because they're always based off of what's the reputation of the business in the workspace. Not necessarily in their industry. Okay. I said workspace very specifically. Do they have a reputation for, I'm going to jump over that table and break your arms if you make one more punctuation mistake, right? Are they that kind of company? Do you want to work for that kind of company? Are they really that kind of company, right? And pick and choose your battles. Every company, let's pick on Amazon. Actually, I know Microsoft works much this way too. So we'll pick on those 2 big ones. Every group of about 10 people is a different team and a different expression of the corporate culture. So you can go from one team and be like, oh my God, best ever. Oh my God, best ever. And then you can literally walk 5 cubicles over and be miserable. So as an interviewee, first 1 or 2 out of the gate, I suck because I'm overthinking it. As the process goes on, I've dialed in how to self-coach or self-talk, walk in with confidence, and frankly have done homework to say, do I want to participate?
Makes you so much more invested too when you actually have questions that you're interested in getting answered, because you're seriously considering this is the place you're going to spend the next 20 plus months, right? And that I feel like is a game changer in my head of, okay, do I care enough to do this research because I'm actually considering this, or is this just a warm-up interview and maybe I should spend some more time on it, right? So
let me tell you, as an interviewer and somebody asks me those kinds of questions, I love it. I love it. Even if I'm already 80% down the road of making a decision that this is not going to be a good fit, I love that kind of dynamic.
Yeah. Do you have any other tips or advice for folks who are preparing for interviews or technical interviews?
Gosh, that's a really good question. First and foremost, so get confident, right? If you're naturally self-critical, grab your cell phone, record a speech to get out of your own head and to remind you that you're confident, that you're skilled, talented, and amazing. I love to tell people in my everyday life, do you, semicolon, you are amazing, right? So anybody listening to this, do you are amazing. And I'm not just saying that because it's a nice platitude and I hope to turn it into a t-shirt business or something. I genuinely believe it. People will astound you both negatively and positively every stinking day. So if you're in that realm of naturally hyper self-critical, figure out how to get a positive tape playing in your head. Because if you can't go in the room with confidence, nobody's going to want to hire you.
Yeah.
The second thing, and we talked about this during break, is that learn to deal with rejection, right? Especially in this next year, the technical industry is going through some Herculean shifts. You've got, we've got what's going on with Twitter, right? They've laid off an incredible number of brilliant people, some of whom I've known. There's an almost overnight change in the culture. Most of it, if we read the papers correctly, appears to be driven by economics. We know that there's inflation pressure, which means then technology companies are going to look to lower their so hiring freezes. Positive self-talk, but you're going into this environment where you're probably going to get a lot of rejection. Understand, they're not making a value judgment. What they're saying is you're not the right person for this role at this time.
Yeah.
And do what you need to do to wash that off. On the technical side, do your research. There are only so many interesting Java questions we can ask. There are only so many interesting machine learning questions we can ask. So be prepared, right? Show up, be prepared. And I would say the last thing is this. If you're ever asked a question that is have you ever failed? Don't lie.
Yeah.
We've all failed, right?
Yeah.
We have all failed. But know how to tell that story where you learned something.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So, I made the joke earlier about tell me, and I can't remember if this is recorded or not, but tell me about a time when you cost your business 5 times your annual salary.
Yeah.
I did that. And I had to go to my boss and say, Bob, his name was Bob Hunter. And I said, Bob, I've made a mistake and we need to have a conversation about it. And of course he was in the middle of doing something else, like, what do you mean? So it's really bad. We need to talk now. Okay. So we talked about it. I explained to him what happened. I said, I expected this to happen, but I didn't know this system did this other thing. We've lost $125,000 over the last month. Would you like my resignation? And he goes, no, why? I just spent $125,000 in teaching you a lesson. Why? No, get back to work. Right. And I remember that moment so vividly because I just had a kid. I was absolutely convinced I was out of a job. And what I'm trying to get at, if I failed to say this, is in the interview, you need to be confident, but you also, when you're asked those kinds of questions, you need to be humble enough to say, yeah, I have made mistakes.
Yeah.
What they're not going to tell you is what they're listening for is, how have you benefited from that mistake?
Yeah.
And if you can turn that around and say, and then I was consulting or I was doing a code review and I saw somebody about ready to use the exact same approach. And I was able to say, don't do that because right? Then that goes a long way to demonstrating teachability, humility, and that you're paying attention. Well, that was a long answer. Sorry.
No, it's great. I think it's so important though, trying to understand what is the question that a company's actually asking, right? Sometimes the question that the words that they say do not make it immediately clear what they are looking for in your answer, right? Like you said, if it's tell me about a time that it's your salary is, you've done something that costs 5 extra salary. If the response is, oh, I put a 0 where I should have put a 1 and we immediately lost millions of dollars, right? I think there's a big Knight Capital thing in the past where
Right,
millions of
right.
dollars in trades happened instantly, right? Or within seconds. And if all you said was, yeah, that was pretty bad. Like you might get the probing from the interviewer to go, oh, okay, so what'd you learn from that? Hopefully they give you, push you in the direction that they actually what they want to hear from the question, but often they won't. So you have to have done it enough, maybe have enough practice, have enough like kind of, I don't know, business intelligence to recognize, oh, they don't want to know when I failed. They want to know is when I failed and what I learned from it, right? They want to know when I've had a dispute with a coworker and how we got through it, because inevitably we'll have some dispute in the future and then we'll have to work through it, right? So
Yes.
understanding that, like what they're actually asking you, and some of that can just come from look up the top 50 HR questions or interview questions, and just, you don't have to have a canned response. You don't really want a canned response, but at least glance at them and know, okay, what are they actually trying to get at with this? Because you do see a lot of the same types of questions over and
You
over.
do.
Right?
And it's have a strategy, right?
Yeah.
My personal style is I do not give somebody a diving save. If they tell me they suck, they suck.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it pains me to say that, right? So black and white and so harshly, but hopefully for our listeners, or your listeners, sorry. Hi, I've got an ego. It's all about me, folks. But that because I can't tell you what it is I'm looking for. There's a Supreme Court judgment. Sorry, I like to teach by analogy. And they were asked to define pornography, and they said, well, we can't define it, but we will recognize it when we see it.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. There's a little bit of this adversarial thing is I do know what I'm looking for. I can't necessarily tell you within the course of the interview what it is I'm looking for.
Yep.
Because I can't help you. I can't give Taylor Dorsett any more of an advantage over Angela Murphy, right? Or Zimbeke Umkwala, right? And these are people that I have working relationships with. And then I'm making up names, but drawing from people I've really worked with. I can't give any one of them special treatment. If I'm giving them special treatment, I'm breaking my responsibility under hiring practices to keep it fair. Yeah. So you're right. No, people are guilty of making diving saves. That will often be when you said this, I heard blah, right? Those types of questions when asked by an interviewer are definitely signaling something.
Yeah.
Don't panic. You still might give them the answer they don't want, but that's just part of the process.
Yeah. It's great. You said the confidence thing as well. Be confident, which is such a hard thing to do. I'll tell you, I've tried just about everything, and coming from a sports background in high school and college, like I think I had a lot of stuff that worked in that setting, which I tried, and some of it works. I've done everything from the power posing to I used to listen to I had the same pump up music I would listen to for sports before I went into interviews. I used to listen to comedy specials on my way to interviews because I thought it would make me a little more friendly. Done everything, right? And some of it worked for me, some of it didn't. But I would say if you're struggling with that, be confident. Try all of those things. Right? The worst case scenario is you go, well, cross that one off the list. Best case is, you go to the bathroom and you stand in the stall on a power pose for 3 minutes before your interview, but you do 20% better. Great. Do it before every interview, right?
But you know what? But even 1% can make the difference between a yes and no. I did a musical for the first time this last summer, and I'm not a fantastic singer, folks. Like this was not outside of my comfort zone. It was into outer space of discomfort. And my voice coach said, well, before you go into audition, just do a star pose, right? That was her notion of the power pose, right? And this is crazy. I did it, right? And it was so funny. I was so nervous that I gave my music to the accompanist and I struck this star pose. And then I looked at her and I said, all right, let's go. And I think part of the reason I got cast was they wanted to be able to ask the question, what was all that about? Right. And I honestly told them, I said, I was so freaked out that I did it.
Yeah.
There's power, right? There's real genuine power in doing something, anything. I knew somebody who would rub their belly, right? And getting ready to do something, they would rub their belly and then tell them what an amazing person they were. And anytime they got nervous in the interview, like I'm rubbing my belly here and you can barely tell I'm doing anything because the camera's this high up. When you're sitting in a room and you're behind a desk, same thing.
Yeah.
Do something, have a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Do you have any additional advice or different advice for early career folks? Maybe this is their first job search, or they're they've had one and now looking for their second job.
The first one or two are hard. They're typically harder. It doesn't mean that interviewing gets any easier. It means that convincing people you're the right person for the role can be harder. And sometimes you don't have enough experience under your belt to give you that, even if the tape is stuck in negative mode, that you've got wins under your belt that are fun and interesting and impressive. What I would say is this. I talked very early on about, I like to start interviews with elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Have one.
Yeah.
It never hurts to have an elevator pitch. Are you going to use it within the context of an interview? Well, you certainly will if you interview with me. In that, how can you convince somebody within a 10 to 20 second window, a monologue, mini monologue, you're interesting, you're likable, and you're relatable? Because if you're interesting and you're likable and you're relatable, you've triggered you've triggered our bias on the other side of the table to want to hire you.
Yeah.
We want to be surrounded by people who are interesting, who are likable, and are relatable. If you have that mini monologue, I think that goes a long way to giving you a cornerstone of confidence. And because you have it memorized, and if you're in that stall doing your power pose, I'm going to do the star, right? Which is going to be awkward as heck if somebody's walking by and it's got a little thing, but you're just internally playing that tape of how amazing you are in that moment in time, how amazing you are. I think it's going to carry through into the interview. I do that. I mean, full confession mode. I do that. I have some training as an actor, and I've performed on stage. So there's a way you can trick the brain into assuming the power pose, right? And it's called energy. It's called energy posing or energy positioning. And so you memorize what this feels like with the energy shooting out in all 5 directions, head, arms, and feet. And then you can be in a fetal position and still channel that reality. And that naturally has the same effect physiologically on your person. And I'm sorry, that just sounds so Jedi, heebie-jeebie, magic wagic, but have that 10 to 30 second, I know I said 20 earlier. Tell me how you're interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me how you're unique. Like early on when I was responsible for my primary niche was doing a lot of email marketing type work. I would totally lead the conversation with, I was working with an international corporation and we figured out how to send Japanese content to Japanese handsets, regardless of which encryption or character encoding they use, because there isn't a Japanese standard. From that, I learned and I feel like those are good life skills to carry into any current working position. well, then people wanted to know, right? All of a sudden I became interesting.
Yeah.
And so you've created that lean in interest from the other side of the table.
Yeah.
That having that internal monologue, that sales pitch, that elevator pitch, it takes time, right?
Mm.
Either you're super quick-witted and you can invent a darn good one on the fly, or people have really thought about it and really own and possess who they are and what they bring to the table.
Yeah.
And don't focus on just, well, I graduated from the University of Washington and with a 3.2 GPA. I don't care. It's on your resume, probably.
Yeah.
I don't care. But you also don't want to go to the dating site extreme, right?
Sure. Yeah.
On my weekends, I like to go, power biking. No, within the context of what's appropriate for the interview, make yourself relatable, likable, and interesting. And I think one of the best prep tools is to have that sales pitch, and be able to own it, to know it, and to not make it feel like it's recitation.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Being able to make it sound like you're not coming up with it, but it's off the cuff, right? Like you're very confident in saying it, I think can be difficult for folks, but that is a repetition thing, right? Like if you look
Yeah.
in a mirror or sit with your friend, significant other, somebody, right? And repeat it to them and see if they say, oh, you seem kind of stiff when you do it. Okay, let me try it again, right? Or do it in the mirror
Yeah.
and just practice that. And that really does help with being able to have I think it's two parts, right? It's like one is the content, but one is the length. I feel like often people can give you a pitch, but it's 2.5 minutes. After the first 45 seconds, I'm going, okay, kind of get to the point, right? I don't need to hear all of this. So it's the concise part that a lot of friends can help you with that, and then just doing
Yeah.
it to yourself, you're recording yourself and listening to it back, right? Like, did you lose interest while you're listening to yourself? Okay, well, maybe you got to change this a little bit, right? And I think a lot in the terms of hooks, of like we're dropping hooks that the
Yes.
interview can
Yes.
kind of bite on later on. And even if they don't ask you right away, they might go, hey, you mentioned that I think about the Japanese text messages. Like, can you talk more about that? Because that's really interesting to me, right? And then you may get a conversation about Japan, right? Maybe you've got a
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
conversation where you've actually made an impact on this person and you're not just another name on a resume. You had a whole conversation about how you love Japan, they
Yeah.
love Japan. Great.
Right. No, and let me be, I think I said in some of the prep discussion, what you asked, what's the longest elevator pitch I've ever gotten? At 5 minutes, I've so lost interest that that's when I will aggressively jump in and reframe. Right.
Yeah.
I love the idea that you use at 45 seconds, right? Everybody's attention span is different. I would just want to repeat everything you said verbatim.
Yeah.
Record it. Make sure you're interested in yourself.
Yeah.
If you aren't, do some more homework.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, before we wrap up, one fun one for you, or maybe not so fun. You have any interviewing horror stories that you're willing to share? That maybe people can relate to say, oh, if John went through this, he's had this great career or has this great career, I could get through it too.
Wow, that's a good and you sent me these questions in advance, and obviously I skipped one. The horror stories, yeah, I sure have a few. Yeah. Yeah. One time as an interviewer, I had a candidate who was so unqualified that it was painfully obvious.
Hmm.
Like it was, out of all the interviews I've done, it was the first time I'd ever had anybody who was genuinely not demonstrating competency. And they did one interview, and we did multi-part interviews. So first person went in, shortened their interview by 50%. So interviewed the person for a half hour, walked out, tag team the other person in early. They came to me and said, oh my gosh, da 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 da. And I was like, really? Okay. So then the other person wanted to tap out a half hour in. And I stepped in the room and I said, just give me a minute. We're coordinating some things. And even trying to redirect the candidate, they were so stuck in, and let me give you the analysis at the end. And so as an interviewer, the hardest thing about that horror story was it was totally appropriate to tell that candidate not even 1 hour into a planned 6-hour interview process, we've already made the decision, no.
Yeah.
And they were convinced that the interview was going well, right? It was a horror story of a horror story of a horror story.
Yeah.
In hindsight, being 2020, I think the person was on the autism spectrum. And in this day and age, could have benefited from an awareness that they had autism and asked for an accommodation. I do know, so the thing about me is that I feel very, very guilty. I felt very, very guilty in that situation. And so I've kept tabs on their career. They are phenomenally successful. They can code like a demon. We may have made a regrettable decision that day, but so that was that horror story. On the other side, as the interviewer or as interviewee, I was involved in, and I have two that I'll share. One was same thing happened to me. It was a 6-hour. They'd asked me what I wanted for lunch, blah blah blah. I got 90 minutes into the interview, and I was told that we're not interested.
Did you still get
And
lunch?
no, I didn't. No, it was like, because it started at 9 and we got to 10:30, and I walked out the door. And I, to this day, am convinced that I was interviewing well. So it is probably the only time in the interviewing process that I didn't learn anything.
Yeah.
Which I won't say it keeps me up at night, but now that I've brought it back up, yeah, it'll probably keep me up tonight. The other one is a bit of a horror story, in that I was interviewing. So I told you I'd worked for this small startup company called Dorsett. Sadly, they don't exist anymore. And most of what they did is now done with software. We're in the interview process. It was a panel interview. And the panel said, we only have one question for you. Chris, you want to ask your question? He goes, sure. And he goes, I see on your resume that you did the order pipeline for US West Wireless. Could you walk me through how you solved this problem? Sure. And I realized in O notation, in the middle of the interview, in O notation, I had done an in-cubed implementation. So for those of you who are not familiar with Big O, that's how long it would take to process n. So if it's 8, it's 8 cubed. 64, whatever that, 280 something. And I'm literally in the middle of it, and I went, oh my gosh. And I turn around, and Chris is sitting at the center of it, and he goes, oh. And I said, I'm really mortified. This is like the worst possible implementation. And I didn't see it. I said, this is my first order pipeline. I said, I don't know how I'd fix this, but I wish I'd seen it, because now I said, I'm gonna have to go home and think this through. I was so embarrassed. One of the few times in an interviewing process, if I could have just wished myself to not exist, right? And Chris, it wasn't Chris Love, it was a different Chris. He's just sitting there with his hands pursed, steepled in front of us, and he goes, can you imagine how difficult it was to undo that when we replaced that system? And I said, I can't imagine. I said, I did that because it gave you these features, but clearly there's a better way to go. Even sitting here today, knowing that code in and out, I don't know the answer. I said, I'm embarrassed. And I said, well, I guess it's been nice interviewing with you all. And that was my last interview for the day.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I was a no hire up to the point that I said, but in Chris's mind, until the point that I had that dawning realization, and I had sufficient humility to say, yeah, wow, that's really stupid.
Yeah.
Right. So if there's a bit of a silver lining, even those interviews that go horribly well and you're mortified, or you have to confess something to somebody, things still turn out okay.
Yeah.
That's why I can't stress enough that even in the midst of that horror story, that horrific moment, you can learn something from it, right? You can do better next time. You can refine your skills. You can In the moment, do what comes naturally to you, which for me is to take ownership of my mistakes and try to learn from them. And they really gravitated towards that. So even in my single, I mean, that one is galvanized. I mean, if you cut me open and look in my spine, you will see that one just engraved in my spine. It was so embarrassing and so mortifying, an absolute true horror story.
But you got through it and you survived.
Well, and yeah, thank you. I didn't know what to say there, so I kind of shoulder shrugged. I'm like, no, let's not don't never leave them on a down note, right? George Costanza.
Well, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Your worst moment in interviewing is not the end of your story.
Yeah.
I'm a natural cheerleader, right? I mean, back in high school, mascot cheerleader, blah, blah, blah. True stories. But I'm a natural cheerleader. I don't care how bad you just mucked up the last interview you did on. Work through the pain, work through the embarrassment, decommission that negative self-talk, and figure out how you're going to learn from it. My son just recently graduated from DigiPenn University, or DigiPenn Institute of Technology up here in Redmond, Washington. And his freshman year, they talked about the power of something called a coding duck. And a coding duck at that school was literally, they gave that incoming freshman class these little rubber ducks that went, right?
Yeah.
And you could stick it on top of your monitor. And when you got stuck, you could turn to the duck and say, "Can I explain what I'm trying to do to you?" And the duck, of course, can't speak, right? And so you start explaining what it is you're trying to do. And all of a sudden your brain will go, bam, right? I would say, no matter how shitty your interview went, even if it's going to be somebody's top one horror story experience, you can learn from it.
Yeah.
Just find a coding duck. If it's an inanimate object, like your favorite Amazon teacup with broken handle, if it's a rubber duck, if it's a teddy bear, if it's a friend who knows how to be positive, get yourself a coding duck. Number one. And number two, it probably wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because there's the whole emotional story, right? The emotional reality. It really probably wasn't that bad.
Yeah. But it's, and you as the individual always remember, like it's highly likely that no one else in that interview panel remembers that interview at all, right? Maybe that one person, but it's highly likely no one else remembers it. And those are the things that, you still wake up at 4 a.m. going, I can't believe that happened, right? And it's hard to let it go, but I think that is the nice part is for you, it's always feels worse than anyone else. And often, even if an interview went poorly, if you learn something from it, like the learning experience, if an interview went okay, a lot of times, again, if you're not the right person at this time, doesn't mean you won't ever be the right person. If it's a company you love, right? You may be a right person 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, right? And like some of the best working relationships I've ever had have come from, I met this person. It wasn't the right time for us to work together, but then in the future, this makes a lot of sense, right? And like then it's great. You already know the person. You've already kind of connected with them, you bonded with them, you get along with them well, and that can feel like that is just as valuable. Yeah, if you need the job today, you need a job today, right? But if you're thinking about it in a long-term perspective, like interviewing is almost networking, right? As long as you're not doing terrible things when you're interviewing, right? You're meeting people that hopefully you'd like to work with, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Hopefully I'm not derailing this, so insert opportunity to delete comments. Ryan Cranston, I think his name is, played Breaking Dad and Malcolm in the Middle's dad, Breaking Bad.
Bryan Cranston,
Bryan Cranston. As an actor, he has this really great perspective. For acting, your job isn't performing.
Yeah.
That's the reward for doing your job. Your job is to book the room, audition, walk out of that room, forget everything that's unimportant about that audition, and book the next room.
Yeah.
I know it's an acting analogy, and I apologize for that if it's off-putting to anybody, but that's where you are in your interview process. Your job isn't the job you're going to get. Your job in that moment is to book the room and audition the best that you can. And when you walk out, you don't know. It's in one of 3 states. Yay, nay, maybe.
Yeah.
You know? And if it's yay, they're going to call you with an offer. If it's nay, sadly these days, they may never tell you.
Yeah.
And if it's maybe, they'll call you in for another interview, right? Or a follow-up phone call or something. But you can't get caught up in, shit, I interviewed 10 times and I didn't get a job. I must suck.
Yeah.
Nah, man, because you're not done doing your job. Your job is to book the room, audition, walk out of that room and go find another audition, book another room. There's something else I could share here, and I just don't want to rabbit trail too much. But something that folks can think about is, for every number of submissions you do, how many interviews do you get? Out of however many interviews you get, how many follow-ups do you get? How many offers do you get? And what you're going to find is, we think in terms of success of that one thing, but we don't recognize is that we may need to fill that process with 100 attempts.
Yeah, totally.
To get that one.
It's a sales funnel, right? It's the way I think of it. It's a sales funnel. You got to fill top of the funnel, and then eventually, one offer, a couple offers clunks out the bottom.
Yeah.
Right?
And as a guy whose responsibility increasingly is sales engineering, sales terrifies me.
Yeah.
Right. Put me in a room, ask me to talk about myself. Oh, you'll never get me to shut up.
Yeah.
This whole podcast probably being exhibit A. But it's, we're ending on horror stories, which I think is important. There's value there. Otherwise you wouldn't do it, right? I think the thing is that if you feel like all of a sudden you're in the J.J. Abrams action movie film epic of a horror story of your own last interview, who cares? The next person you talk to, the next person you meet, knows absolutely nothing about what happened in that room or that phone call. You control the script more than you think you do. And one of the tools that I like to use, both as an interviewee and as an interviewer, is, what's your sales pitch? Your sales pitch does not need to include your most embarrassing moments.
Yeah.
So
I love it, John. Thank you so much. It's been a blast. And please, anything you want to plug, anything you want to share, or tell people where they can find you online, or not find if you don't want them to?
No, that's fine. So LinkedIn, John Dugaw, it's terribly out of date. I'm in the process of updating it. If you're looking for technical voiceover work, John Dugaw-VO on Facebook. Excuse me. Support your local theater. No. And I would say this, just if my epitaph were, do you, semicolon, you are awesome, that would be the last thing I'd want to say.
Awesome.
Thank you for watching the technical interview portion of the Professional Technical Interviewee. If you want to tackle this interview question, you can find it at github.com/professional technical interviewee. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett, or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.